In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to create user controls for use in iBuySpy. Now, user controls for iBuySpy are similar to user controls that you create for other applications, except there's a few extra lines of code that you need to add. Also, there's some other considerations. For example, the first point here, be careful when using forms within your user controls. If you use a form, like for the one that we'll do in just a few moments, you got to make sure that you don't put that user control on the same page as another user control that has a form as well, like the front page that has the login user control by default. And the reason is because .NET doesn't handle two forms being on the same page very well. Therefore, what they suggest is that you build user controls that are like a view. In other words, they display data with a link to another page that will actually allow you to edit that data, whether from a user perspective or from an admin perspective. Now, as you know from the LearnVisualStudio.net website, and you see there's two forms on the front page, there is a workaround on how to do that, but it's not pretty, and I'll demonstrate how to do that in a future video. Like I said earlier, the only difference between an iBuySpy user control and a regular user control is that there's a few extra lines of code. Ultimately, in the code behind for the user control is going to derive from the ASP.NET Portal Module Control namespace. And this namespace in the class that you base your class on controls some of the underlying services that are provided for you by iBuySpy, such as control registration, caching, positioning, the other things like the labels at the top of the control and the whole being able to administrate the control and the settings. That's all controlled by that ASP.NET Portal Module Control base class. So this is where the beauty of OO comes in, where we can just derive from that base class, and we get all that extra functionality without having to do a whole lot. We'll show an example of that in just a few moments. The other thing that you're going to have to do with an iBuySpy user control versus just a regular user control is that in the iBuySpy interface, you're going to have to register a special user control called Desktop Module Title, and that's what will give you the common UI at the very top of all the pages. So in just a moment, I'm going to show you an example iBuySpy user control that is a Tell a Friend module. It'll let those people who come to your website after they see how much they love your website and want to tell their friends, it'll let them put in a friend's name and email address, and then also their name and email address. And this module will send an email to the friend with a predefined message that you create. In the next video, I'll show you how to create an edit page that allows you to change the message. In this video, we'll just hard code the message. Now, we have a very simple example. In the real world, you're probably going to want to expand this so that you can't use, so that somebody can't maliciously use this to spam somebody, and you'd want to check to make sure that that email has not been used already. You might want to save it in a database or something along those lines. And then you'd also probably want to follow the iBuySpy control architecture a little more closely. Whenever you look at the way that they implemented their user controls, they have a kind of a fine line between the business logic that the user control uses and the interface of the actual user control. Now what we're going to do is just, we don't really have any back-end process. There's no database to hit for our control, at least here initially, and so we won't need that type of an architecture. We're just going to create everything in the code behind for the user control. And then finally, you'll probably want to add some validation to this in order to make it a legitimate example. And just two quick notes before we begin into the code example. When you finish coding and creating your example, what you probably should do is, well, first of all, you're going to need to register it in the iBuySpy interface. We're going to demonstrate how to do that in just a moment. And once it's registered, you should add it to a page. And so the thing that I'd advise you to do is create a test tab and then put your control on that test tab so that if something blows up, that not the whole world won't be able to see your mistake, just those people who are in the admin role. Okay, so to start off with, what I want to do is open up the Portal CSVS solution, and I'm going to add a new user control, add new item, and I'm going to select Web User Control. We're going to call this Tell a Friend. And after a moment, the Tell a Friend opens up in the designer. And just to begin with, I'm going to make it really easy. I'm just going to put a label in there. I'm going to set the properties of that label to say something like Hello World. And this is just to make sure that we can get our control configured, created, and everything correctly, and then we can go in and create the actual business logic. We'll put a bunch of controls on this user control. But one of the things we need to do first is to add two important lines of code here at the very top. And that first line of code is to register the desktop module title.ascx. And that is what will appear at the top of every user control that you create for iBuySpy. And then, after we've registered it, we'll actually use it here by referencing portal:title. And then we can put in our edit text, which is, in this case, edit mail message. And so what will happen is whenever there's an admin or somebody who has rights to edit this particular user control's content, they'll see a link, edit mail message, and then it will take them to tellafriend.aspx, which we'll create in a little while. It'll allow somebody to change the actual text of the message that'll get sent out. And we'll leave the rest of the properties the same. So at this point, our user control simply knows how to be a iBuySpy user control. There's one other thing we need to do actually is go to the code behind for this page. And what we can do, and what I do a lot of times, is take a look at an existing ASCX. Of course, we want to be able to view all the files. So let's look at the announcements file, for example. Notice that it derives from ASP.NET_Portal module control. So we'll want to use that as well. So we're just going to cut and paste that into our Tell a Friend code behind. So in other words, the code behind for our user control is this file, and we'll want to derive our user control from ASP.NET_Portal module control. Okay, so let's save everything. We can go ahead and shut down this file. So now that we have it sort of what we think working, we're going to go ahead and hit Run. It'll compile, and it'll bring up the iBuySpy interface. And let's go ahead and bring this down here. By default, you have guest and guest. It has admin privileges. You can see the admin tab. Okay, what we'll need to do is go all the way to the right-hand side here where we have module definitions. What we'll want to do is add a new module type. That brings us to a new page. Again, I'm going to scroll this over, and we can call this Tell a Friend, and then we'll want to give it a name, Tell a Friend. So it's in the desktop modules folder, and the control is tellafriend.ascx. And we're going to remove the mobile source because we're not going to support that in our version of this control. I'm going to click Update. And that brings us back to the main admin page. Now, if you look, our Tell a Friend is here at the bottom. So we know that it's registered correctly. Now, what I'd recommend, just to make sure that we can see it and come up, we see Hello World, I'm going to add a tab. Sorry, all this pulling this screen around, but it's kind of necessary. And we're going to call that tab Test. The reason I do this is because if you're using a live iBuySpy portal and you're just going to put all your content out there, you want to make sure that it works on your production box before you actually add it to your live site. And the reason is because if you don't, somebody clicks on it and the whole site dies, and then you'll get some angry users. So we've created a new tab called Test. We're going to scroll all the way down to the Tell a Friend, and we'll just call this Test Tell a Friend, and we will add it, and we'll put it over to the right-hand side because, or the left-hand side rather, because this is where I'm planning on using this. So I'm going to click the Apply Changes at the bottom of the screen, which you cannot see in your viewing area. And it brings us back to this page, and notice now at the very top there's a new test that appears. And so let's go ahead and click that. And notice what we have here. In the left-hand column, we have the Test Tell a Friend. Since we are an admin, we can see this message, Edit Mail Message, which if we click it now, the application will die because we haven't implemented that yet, and then the Hello World on the label that we've implemented. So everything's looking great. We've got our test page. We've got a test scenario here. I'm going to shut the browser down. We're going to continue developing. So the first thing I want to do is remove our test label and then begin adding our labels and text boxes that we're going to need for the rest of this user control. Basically, we'll need 4 sets, and we'll need a button here at the bottom, and I'll also want to put in a message here. So what we're going to do is set the properties. I'm going to go and pin this window down now. Great. And we're going to set all of our labels first. This will be friend's name, friend's email, your name, your email. I'm going to set only the IDs for here, so we're going to call this to name, to email, from name, and from email. With our button, we want to name that to send and also set the text to send as well. And then our label, we want it to have LBL error, and then I'm going to change the text to nothing. So now we need to go to our code behind for the send button. When somebody clicks it, we want to add some code. And as you can tell here, I've already taken the liberty of adding some code. Essentially what I did first was added the sendMail method. And the sendMail method takes in the from email, from name, to name, all the fields that we've collected, and it will create a message object, a mail message object, and we'll set the properties, the from, the to, the subject, and the body, and then finally we'll send that message. Now, in order to use the mail message object and the SMTP mail object, you have to have a reference in your code using system.web.mail in order to accomplish that. So make sure you have that in there. And then also, what we do when somebody actually clicks the send button is we've wrapped a try, catch, finally statement. We call our send mail, and if there's no problem, then we'll post a success message. And if there is a problem, then we will post a failure message. And then in the finally statement, regardless of what happens, we're going to set the text box's values back to nothing, to an empty string. So let's go ahead and save that. Try building and see what happens. Always cross your fingers at this point. Great. Okay, so now we're going to run our application. Now let me warn you in advance that on my local box, I may not have SMTP configured correctly. I'm going to show you where you would find that at. However, I happen to know that on my web server it's configured correctly by my web host, so I'm not too worried if I don't see an email message after I've created this. But that's not really what we're trying to get across anyway. What we want to demonstrate here is the creation of the control, and whether it works or not, that's kind of secondary. So let's go ahead and do this. We'll type in a friend's name, friend's email, and then your name and your email. Whoops. And then we'll hit the send button. And after a moment, I notice that my antivirus pops up, so that's probably a good sign. And I see a success message here at the very bottom. So maybe my SMTP was configured correctly after all. And now for the good news, I've opened up Microsoft Outlook, and I see that there's a message from Scott at LearnVisualStudio.net. Check out this site. I'm able to look at his mail. Hi, Bob. I saw this site and thought you might be interested. And then there's a link. They got a bunch of videos on .net. Let me know what you think, Scott. So this worked excellently. I'm very happy about this. Let me go ahead and close Outlook down. And we'll go ahead and shut down our iBuySpy portal too. So that pretty much does it for this video. In the next video, I'll demonstrate how to create the edit page. It's pretty simple. There's only a few lines of code that you'll need to implement to make sure that it conforms with the rest of the iBuySpy interface. But other than that, it's basically a web form. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you.